Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar program to discuss how Maine towns and cities are taking advantage of solar to reduce their energy costs. I hope that you and your family is safe and healthy during this COVID-19 crisis that we are still living through. We would have loved to have been with you in person today for this presentation, but we appreciate that you could join us online instead. And it means a lot less driving for many of us. So thanks for joining us here on Zoom. My name is Todd Martin. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Coordinator at the Natural Resources Council of Maine, NRCM. We are a nonprofit membership organization protecting, restoring, and conserving Maine's environment now and for future generations. For more than 60 years, NRCM has helped protect the places and the way of life that make Maine so special. And NRCM harnesses the law, science, and the voices of more than 25,000 members and supporters here in Maine and beyond to protect Maine's environment. We have a staff of about 30, and our office is in Augusta, just steps from the State House. Before we get started with our program today, just a couple of notes about Zoom that we're using today. I'm sure at this point in the pandemic, we're all very familiar with Zoom, but just a couple of quick reminders. This morning's program is being recorded, and tomorrow you'll get an email from me with a link to watch the recording on YouTube. We hope that you'll share that with your coworkers, especially in your municipalities, your select boards, your code enforcement officers, etc. Your video and your audio is disabled this morning by design, so you'll only be able to hear and see our panelists. But if you have a question during the program, please type that question in the Q&A box, which is on the lower ribbon of your Zoom screen, and we'll have plenty of time for questions after our panel discussion. So to get us started, I want to turn it over to Robert Clark, the Executive Director of the Northern Maine Development Commission, to tell us about the important work that NMDC does for Aroostook and Washington counties. Robert, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Todd. We're really pleased to partner with the Natural Resources Council of Maine and Maine Audubon to host the Northern Maine Municipal Solar Forum for our communities and organizations in both Aroostook and Washington counties today. It was interesting to note that in the next 5 years, Maine is projected to increase solar installations from 55 megawatts to 500 megawatts, which can significantly reduce energy costs for our local governments. I also noted today's Bangor Daily News has an article on the multi-million-dollar solar farm at Presque Isle Skyway Industrial Park that will generate large annual electric savings for the city and some nearby industrial companies. So we're excited today about how solar can be not only a job generator, but a source for affordable electrical energy, and hope that you all gain the knowledge you're looking for from this forum today. So with that, Todd, I want to thank you folks for being available today as a panel, and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Great, thank you, Robert. Nick, if you want to go to the next slide. So here's our agenda for this morning. First, I'm going to give an overview of Maine's solar policy, past and present, and sort of where we've been with solar here in Maine and where we're going in the next couple of years. Then I'll turn it over to Andrew Kahrl from Revision Energy, who will talk more about how municipalities around the state are taking advantage of solar to reduce their energy costs. Then we'll hear from Nick Lund from Maine Audubon about solar siting best practices, places to where to build solar and where to avoid building solar. Then we'll hear from Chris Byers from Boyle Associates about responsible solar development, more from the permitting side of things. And lastly, we'll hear from Jim Leighton from the Limestone Water District about the solar energy project that they built, which is helping to reduce energy costs in Aroostook County. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A after our panel discussion. Next slide. So Maine solar policy, where we've been and where we're going. Next slide, please. So just to say a little bit more about the work that we do at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. So we primarily focus on passing strong environmental policy, including solar policy at the State House in Augusta. We testify on bills, we lobby lawmakers, we help to pass and defeat legislation. So really our bread and butter is state environmental policy. In 2014, NRCM started a coalition of Maine solar companies of Maine solar engineers and planners and nonprofits to improve Maine solar energy policy. As you'll learn, states to our south had much better solar policy, and we're reaping the benefits of jobs and lower energy costs. And so we formed a coalition to help get Maine's solar energy policy right. That coalition continues to this day, and it's part of how the folks on this panel came to work together. Next slide, please. So before I get into this chart, I want to start with a poll question. So you'll see a poll here on your screen. Wondering for the folks on the webinar, where in the solar development process your town is. Are you just getting some information? Have you identified a site to build? Are you in talks with a solar developer? Are you in the permitting phase, construction, or do you have an operating project in your town? So if you could just take a second to vote. I'll leave the voting open for just a minute. Just leave it open for one more second here. All right. So most of the folks, about half of you, are just gathering some information. A few have identified a site, and a few are working with the developer, and a couple of you actually have operating solar systems. So that's great. So quite a diverse audience here today. So this graph here on the screen is from 2016, so it's a little bit outdated, but it demonstrates that Maine was really missing out, and we were falling behind other states in the region. States that had installed way more solar energy than Maine had. In 2017, the Maine Public Utilities Commission adopted a rule change that basically gutted net metering, which eventually cost all electricity customers in Maine millions of dollars to implement. The Public Utilities Commission's rollback of net metering really set Maine back. And in March of 2018, utility companies actually started charging Mainers who had installed solar a fee for generating electricity on their own roof. And net metering is really the baseline for solar customers who to give them a bill credit for producing electricity and putting it onto the grid. So just to demonstrate that we were going backwards and not forwards with solar policy here in Maine for most of the last decade. Next slide, please. Again, this graph is also from 2016. Maine had the fewest solar jobs in New England. We were missing out on this kind of solar revolution, and we were losing jobs to Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire. I graduated from college in 2010, and I had many friends who had to move out of Maine to work in the solar industry. They wanted to stay in their home state, but they had to move to Massachusetts or Vermont to get a solar job. So it was a real shame, but things have turned around. Next slide, please. During Governor LePage's 8 years in office, he vetoed 3 solar energy bills that would have really accelerated the growth of solar here in Maine and created a lot of jobs. The legislature failed to override those vetoes by just a couple of votes each time. We were so close. And it was a long, hard-fought campaign to improve Maine's solar energy policy and climate. It wasn't just NRCM and Maine Audubon and Revision and the lobbyists in Augusta that helped make this possible. Mainers from all around the state, from up in the county down to York County, came to Augusta to talk to their lawmakers, to testify at public hearings. This was a long campaign that Maine citizens really led the way. And we really wouldn't be where we are today without thousands of Mainers across the state speaking out for better solar policy. Next slide, please. So where we're going. So at the start of 2019, the Maine legislature and Governor Mills acted quickly to accelerate solar jobs and increase the amount of solar for Maine residents, Maine businesses, and municipalities. Several pieces of legislation were enacted in 2019 with leadership from both Democrats and Republicans. Solar legislation received broad support in the House and the Senate, from all parties because people from all across the state spoke up in support of solar for many, many years. Next slide. One of the first things the legislature did in 2019 was to pass a bill, LD 91, to restore net metering for residential customers. So again, net metering measures the amount of solar that solar users are producing, and they put onto the grid for others to use, and gives them a credit on their monthly electricity bills that they can use to purchase power back from the grid. Net metering is really the standard for residential solar customers across the country, and it's made it possible for thousands of Maine homes and businesses to go solar. So one of the first things that the legislature and Governor Mills did was restore net metering back to what it had been many years ago. Next slide, please. The legislature also passed LD 1494 to update Maine's renewable portfolio standard. Maine is now committed to get 80% of its energy from renewable sources by 2030, just in the next 9 years, and to get 100% of our energy from renewables by 2050. Today, about 40% of the power we consume in Maine comes from renewables. This is positive, but it really hasn't changed much in the last 20, 25 years. About 40% of the energy we use here in Maine comes from fossil fuels, which need to be imported and are subject to dramatic price volatility. So getting to 80% renewables over the next decade is definitely feasible, and it's going to create tremendous investment in Maine's economy and create hundreds of jobs, and we're already seeing that today. Last fall, the Maine Public Utilities Commission announced the winners of their initial bid to procure massive amounts of renewable energy for Maine. And there were 19 projects selected, and 17 of them were large-scale solar projects. Just last week, the Maine Public Utilities Commission launched their second bidding for this process. So we should hear the winners of that process in the months to come. Next slide. The Maine legislature also passed in 2019 a bill, LD 1711, known colloquially, that's a tough word, as the Omnibus Solar Energy Bill. This bill was sponsored by Senator Dana Dow, who is a Republican from Lincoln County. The bill had three major components. First, the Maine Public Utilities Commission initiated a competitive process where developers will work with communities and landowners to build 250 megawatts of community solar. Each of those projects has a cap of 5 megawatts. There'll be incentives to build those projects on previously impacted lands like landfills or rooftops. And you'll hear later in the program from Nick Lund from Maine Audubon about solar siting best practices. Next slide. Furthermore, this bill, LD 1711, included a measure to design and build 125 megawatts of commercial solar projects here in Maine. And this is going to help businesses lower their energy costs and stabilize their energy costs for many years to come. Next slide. And this is my last slide before I turn it over to Andrew Kahrl from Revision. Towns across Maine, from Aroostook County down to York County, are investing in solar to reduce their municipal energy costs. One of the big components of LD 1711 was it removed a barrier so that more towns could take advantage of solar, whether through a single municipal electrical account or multiple electrical accounts. The bill allows towns and cities to subscribe to projects that are as large as 5 megawatts in their same utility district and receive credits on their electric bills. So this allows towns to lock in their energy rates and save significant money on their energy bills for 20 to 30 years. So I'm going to turn it over now to Andrew Kahrl from Revision Energy, who's going to speak more about municipal solar and how towns are taking advantage. So before I turn it over to you, Andrew, we're going to, Nick, stop sharing your screen there, and I'm going to share my screen. And let me bear with me for just a second here.
While you're working on that, Todd, I just want to say how nice it is to look at your slideshow and see so many Revision Energy solar projects that have been completed in the past, and to see so many Revision Energy personnel who are showing up at some of those key moments in the history of solar in Maine. it's, it just goes to show how instrumental revision has been in providing solar, in the lean times before pro-solar legislation, and getting some of those laws passed. We'll certainly be here during this boom time, and then, for whatever comes next and whatever comes next after that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Revision has been, critical in getting Maine solar policy right. Fortunat and Phil Coop and others from Revision for years have lobbied in Augusta, and big part of where we are today.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'll give you an update a little bit about where the industry stands today, how the different types of projects break down, and where the opportunity is for municipalities and water and sewer districts in northern and eastern Maine to take advantage of some of these solar projects to reduce your cost for energy. Next slide, please. So Revision Energy, just a quick introduction to our company. We were founded in Liberty, Maine in 2003. Our headquarters is now in Portland. We still have a branch in Liberty. We have 3 more branches in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. We're 100% employee-owned company. We have about 280 total employees right now, about 220 of which are employee owners of the company. We've installed over 10,000 renewable energy systems in northern New England, most of which are here in Maine. We've been rated #1 rooftop solar installer by Solar Power World magazine. I believe we're #14 in the country, according to their ratings as well. So we're very proud of our company that we own. We're also a certified B Corporation, which if you have never heard of it, it's worth looking up. It's that we carry a third-party certification that we do more than just turn a profit. We also put planet and people as necessary aspects of how we do business. Next slide, please. So there's a couple different scales of solar that are being built in Maine today. There's residential size projects and small commercial, consisting of anywhere from 6 solar panels up to a couple of dozen. And then on the extreme other end, there's utility scale projects like what Chinbro built in Pittsfield, where you're building sometimes as much as 100 or a couple hundred acres worth of solar next to a substation. All that electricity is going on to the grid at the substation, onto the transmission grid, and being sent down to southern New England to be sold wholesale. So essentially, for a project like that, you send electricity out on a previously agreed upon rate, and you get a check back, usually for 3, 4, 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And then there's what we're talking about today, which most of these new laws that Todd mentioned govern, which are commercial and institutional net metered projects. So these are projects that range anywhere from 100 or 200 kilowatts all the way up through a 35-acre project, which could be as much as 7 megawatts in scale. All of these projects generate, rather than cash, they generate net energy billing credits, which is they generate for every kilowatt hour that they generate, they produce a credit against your power bill. And so all these projects need to have customers to buy that electricity at a discount compared to their utility rates, so that they can sort of buy solar energy. Those credits offset their power bills, and they save money in the difference of those two costs. So we're going to be talking about those types of projects today. Now there's 3 legs to the solar stool. There's land, there's money, and there's what we call load, which is who's going to buy these net metering credits. Land, is largely what some of the upcoming people in this presentation are going to be talking about, where to site these projects. It also includes grid capacity. Maine has a certain number of substations. Every substation has a limited ability to actually accept solar power onto the grid in the area of the grid that substation services. And so that is a limitation and a cap on the amount of solar that's going to be able to be developed in northern Maine and eastern Maine. Every time we look at a solar project, whether it's a project that's on site for one of our customers, or whether we're developing a piece of land where we'll sell energy to customers who are not co-located on that site. The first thing we do is look at what's the substation capacity in that region, and is it enough to accept our solar project onto the grid in that location. It's a limited resource, and as you probably all know, there's lots of solar being developed in Maine right now. Not much being built yet, but it's coming. And all those projects that are under development are in line to get that solar capacity on those substations. And so once that is used up, no more solar is going to get built at that point, and except on a very slow time scale. In the industry now, there are a number of different types of companies that provide different legs of that stool. Some companies are here just looking for that land to develop. And they're going to subcontract out someone to go out and find people to buy the electricity. They're going to subcontract out the construction, engineering, procurement, and construction of the project. They'll sub out the asset management and the people who are going to look after the equipment over the course of its life. Some companies do more than that. Some bring their own financing to the table. Some go out looking for financing on the market. Revision Energy is a developer, so we're looking for the land. We're working with municipalities, water and sewer districts, and others to buy that electrical load. And we are also the EPC contractors, so we'll be building that equipment. And we also maintain the equipment over its entire lifespan. So we're not a one-stop shop, but we do a lot. Typically, that's not typical in the industry. More of the time, you're going to see companies that do only one of those tasks and sub out the rest. Next slide, please. So municipalities who come to the table with cash in hand and want to buy a solar project themselves, obviously any developer would be happy to talk to you. Nothing better than having a customer with money in their hand. But the vast majority of the municipalities and water and sewer districts in the state of Maine, when they go solar, they use a power purchase agreement or a net energy billing purchase and sale agreement, which are basically add up to the same thing. Where rather than bring money to the table themselves, the developer finds financing from a tax equity investor who's going to put the money up to build that equipment, develop and build the system. They're going to be able to take those tax benefits that come from building and owning solar, and they will own that system and sell the electricity at a discount, as I mentioned before, to whomever wants it. And essentially, as a municipality or a water sewer district, you would say either whether it's on-site or off-site solar equipment, we're going to buy those net billing credits for a certain rate that saves us money against our power bill. Customers can use their own rooftops. They can build on their own land that they own. Again, the first thing that we look at if we have a customer coming and saying we've got a piece of land or we have a rooftop is the grid in that location going to be able to accept this project? Does the grid capacity exist on that substation to build? And if yes, then we'll continue with the development process. And if no, then we'll put you into an offsite project, because there are multiple companies developing sites all around the state right now in order to sell net metering credits to other customers inside that utility territory. So if you're in the Maine Public Service District, you can buy credits that come from any project in the Maine Public Service District. If you're in the Bangor Hydro District, you can buy credits from anyone there. I should specify, if you're in the Eastern Maine Electric Co-op or the Holton Power Company, those rules are quite different for you than they are from Versant's customers. Next slide, please. So when you want to build an on-site project, again, the first thing we do is file with the utility company for interconnection. There's a long-term development period, largely because of that. It takes them a long time to figure out if they have grid capacity and what the costs are going to be for you to interconnect. And then of course the other things involved with any land development project, which will, there'll be more conversation about this later in the presentation. The land has to be more or less flat, so low contours. Is it upland? What other permitting issues? And do you have any, future alternative use? I mean, this equipment is going to last for 40 years. So you really have to look at the land and say, is there something else that we want to do with this in the next 40 years? It's a long time frame. Rooftops are also a great option, especially if they're large rooftops and built post 1977. Structural review is always the biggest obstacle there, and whatever ongoing maintenance you might have on that rooftop. Solar will definitely obstruct your ability to, reach other HVAC equipment or other equipment that's on that rooftop and deal with leaks and stuff like that. The most important thing is to partner with a solar developer early on who can develop the project all the way through to the end, but can also identify red flags early on. You don't want to end up 1 or 2 years from now working with a developer and then you find out about the issues at that point, because you'll be pretty late in the game. It'll be hard to get your substation capacity or find a place to procure energy 1 or 2 years from now. It's a fast moving industry. Next slide, please. If you don't have a parcel of land that's going to work, if you can't get that substation capacity, again, you can procure net energy billing credits at a discount from projects built in your utility territory. The nice thing about this process is, in terms of getting under contract for this energy, it's a much shorter time frame. A company who has projects under development will be able to sign a contract with you very, very quickly. Again, the trick is, if that project is only under development at the point in time that you sign the contract, there are chances that those contract terms can change over the next 12 or 24 months as that project starts to encounter, what some of the real world difficulties of development are. So it's important to work with a company that has plenty of development experience and a realistic attitude towards what those costs are going to be and how it's going to translate into your discount. There is a limited supply of energy coming from these projects. So I think, I've mentioned this a few times, but the thing I really want to drive home is that if this seems like something that your town or your water and sewer district is interested in exploring, start exploring it right away, because it's going to be a lot harder to do this in January of 2022 than it is in January of 2021. Next slide, please. And that's all I've got. Happy to talk offline with anybody who has additional questions after this presentation is done. I'd love to chat with you.
It's my turn now. Hello, everybody. I'm Nick Lund from Maine Audubon. We are a conservation organization working to protect Maine wildlife and wildlife habitat. We achieve that in a number of ways through education, conservation, and advocacy. Maine Audubon has been a major supporter of renewable energy for decades. When our headquarters was built on land donated to us in Falmouth, when our headquarters was built in the 1970s, it was on the cutting edge of green design, right? All kinds of different ways. This image we see here are some of the solar panels that we have up in what we call our North Meadow. And today our Falmouth campus is about 75% powered by solar. We're still major supporters of solar and renewable energy, both for individuals and for local governments. But we recognize that we need to balance our desire for additional solar power with Maine Audubon's mission to protect Maine wildlife and wildlife habitat. Like any kind of development or construction, wildlife and habitat are impacted by solar construction. So our goal here is to help minimize the natural resource impacts from solar to help maximize the benefits to Maine from solar. And what that means is some consideration to siting where we put these things. So next slide, please. I am going to hopefully drop a link in the chat to some resources that Maine Audubon, NRCM, Revision, and a bunch of other groups put together about this topic. And that are hosted on the Maine Municipal Association website. So that link should take you there. When towns or individuals are considering developing their own solar installations, they should put some effort into finding locations that minimize the landscape impacts. This report that I just linked to and that you see here in the image is from November 2019, outlining how Maine can take advantage of renewable energy while still protecting our wildlife and habitat. So part of the resources that you see on the website are a best practices document outlining how to avoid and minimize the impacts to natural and agricultural resources. We've also developed a model ordinance that towns can use to develop smart policies for the placement of solar. And that's where the link is. Man, over a year ago now, I guess, or actually probably this summer it was, we also mailed out hard copies to this, so you may have them if you are work for a municipality. Next slide, please. So what I want to do here today is just sort of go through our top recommendations from the report, just to give you a sense of where our priorities are as a coalition in terms of how you can minimize the impacts from solar development. So number one, and the big one, and it's alluded to by Andrew and by Todd and by others, is that we hope that you could preferentially use disturbed, developed or degraded habitat for your solar farms. So these are lands like landfills, brownfields, roadway medians and edges, parking lots, rooftops, of course, idle or underutilized industrial commercial sites, sand and gravel pits. Using disturbed lands avoids new forest clearing, it minimizes soil disturbance, and it takes advantage of these underutilized spaces. So as you are looking around and figuring out where you're going to put, you know, the best place, where you're going to put some solar, use a place that, you know, has already been disturbed. This here is a 4-acre project in Portland at a place that I know as Dragon Fields. It's a landfill, capped landfill. It was built by Revision Energy and came online in 2018. The state of Maine has about 1,800 acres of capped landfills, enough for about 250 projects of this size, which is about 1.2 megawatts. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to show some examples of different projects that are put in what we think as good spots. This is a 651 kilowatt project on a gravel pit in Durham, New Hampshire by Revision. Next slide, please. This is the town of St. George, Maine. This is on top of their transfer station. This 67 kilowatt hour project supplies about 90% of the town's energy needs. You can see it's all on the rooftop there. So again, this is land that's already been cleared. This is not harming any wildlife habitat or anything at all. This is a rooftop that was just sitting there. Next slide, please. This is the Kennebec Sanitary Treatment District. It treats the wastewater from residents of the city of Waterville and the towns of Winslow and Fairfield and Benton. You can see their solar panels sort of go out the back there and down the hill in the back. This is almost a megawatt of power, 2,800 solar panels. This offsets about 90% of the electricity usage from this facility per year. And you know, importantly, offsets about 1.2 million pounds of CO2 emissions from this project. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we sort of move away from the disturbed habitats. We're trying to look at other habitats. And so continuing to avoid and minimize impacts to sensitive wildlife habitats or to high value natural resources is critical as we look for appropriate land to build these projects. So this would include habitats identified as significant wildlife habitats under Maine's Natural Resources Protection Act and other habitats identified as sensitive. This includes endangered species habitats, rare plants, cold water fish, wetlands, eelgrass beds, what are called focus areas of statewide ecological significance, and wherever possible, forested areas that have not previously been cleared and other connected landscapes. Next slide, please. So where are we going to find these places? There are a couple of resources available to you. Maine Audubon on our website. If you go to maineaudubon.org, we have what we call our solar siting viewer. What this is a GIS map with different layers from the state and from other locations that show you different special habitats or disturbed habitats that you could sort of narrow down your search for. Another good option here, this screenshot is from what is called the Beginning with Habitat project. This is run by the state. This is a section showing Fairfield. It's a little tough to see in this screenshot, but there are different colored layers with showing you different sort of natural resource values. So, this these map resources won't take the place of sort of a detailed site-specific review, and there's a lot of other things to look for, as Andrew mentioned, you know, the grading of the site, et cetera. But this is a good place to start when you're trying to narrow down to try to find some potentially good spots. So that's beginningwithhabitat.org is where you can find maps like this. Next slide, please. Avoid, if possible, impacts to intact forest landscapes, right? So forests are important for a million reasons. They provide habitat for wildlife. They allow wildlife to move. They have ecosystem services of their own, right? They are, from a climate perspective, helpful for pulling CO2 out of the air. And so keeping intact forests wherever possible is really critical. Avoiding, to the best of our ability, forests and landscapes helps maximize the benefits of carbon reduction and increase the benefits of solar production. You know, and this is a real issue. From 2012 to 2017, about 1/4 of all land development in Massachusetts, and 1/4 of all sort of forest loss was a result of ground-mounted solar. About 6,000 acres of what used to be forest and farmland has been converted to solar. So, you know, of course, that's a big benefit to the state, but it's really something to consider. Next slide, please. Number 4, please, you know, it's best to try to minimize impacts by locating projects near existing development, right? Because as you build the solar, you also have the connections to the grid and other roads and other things that may connect back. And so the more you can think about to minimize the impacts of the sort of some of the secondary construction really help. Beginning with habitat maps help here, although sort of wildlife corridors aren't really mapped very well. So locating near the built environment wherever possible and co-locating with transmission lines, with you know, existing transmission lines or roads is really helpful. And finally, next slide, please. It helps to really put some thought into the vegetation that you maintain around these arrays. So you obviously you need to keep the vegetation down around these solar panels so it doesn't block out the light hitting the panels itself. But there are some things you can do to actually you know, create a beneficial landscape surrounding these arrays, including planting native vegetation. Planting native vegetation can help restore native pollinators, increasing insect and bird diversity in the region. There are a lot of resources under development that can help us figure out exactly what to plant, how to plant it, et cetera. Maine Audubon is working with the Wild Seed Project and some other organizations to make resources available, and we will keep you updated with that. That's all I have today. Thank you very much, and looking forward to taking questions at the end.
Great, thanks everybody. My name is Chris Byers. I work for Boyle Associates, and we're functioning as a consulting firm that specializes in natural resources. So our teams are, you know, out in the field even today. Actually, seem to have lost a bunch of snow in Maine recently, but probably not up in your parts for most people that are on this call. So, you know, we do a lot of field work. We work with wildlife biologists, but we also act as the hub of the wheel for solar developers. So I've been working in the solar industry for 11 years now, have built a ton of projects. All of the pictures that you're going to see in my presentation are projects that I have directly managed and built across New England. But none of them are actually from Maine because this is a relatively new program. So Andrew's got a lot of great revision pictures and they've got a good footprint, but a lot of these distributed generation projects that we are working on right now, which is probably over 70 that I'm permitting across the state. I even see a couple people in the attendee list that are familiar faces, people that I've met with at various towns that are interested in, you know, what do we do with this? So I wanted to kind of provide you with an idea of how are we promoting responsible development as consultants in this industry across Maine. Go to the next slide. So next one. So the important thing to emphasize here is that, you know, the power that's produced from these projects that fall under LD 1711 has to stay in Maine. I think we're no stranger to renewable energy in Maine. We have over 900 megawatts of wind power that is produced in this state. And at the same time, a lot of that power gets exported out of the state where Mainers don't directly benefit. There's some benefits sort of at the town level, maybe even in some ways by injecting power into the grid and having renewable energy flow through our power lines. But this program that's now in place with the solar projects is specifically designed to help Mainers and towns and businesses, and it really can't be sold out of state. So it's a cool time to be in this industry, but as Andrew indicated, it's rapidly evolving. And I would encourage you, if you're working with the town, to kind of keep that in mind. I think a lot of people want to have kind of a program and figure out how we do this, but folks on this call are in the middle of this right now. And so if you want to reach back out afterwards, please let us know how we can help and accelerate your processes as you try to figure out what opportunities you have with solar. Go to the next slide. So we help our clients with siting. And as Nick indicated, oftentimes what we'll do is we'll look at a project from the desktop review perspective first before we even go out on site, and we'll give them feedback. And there are a ton of publicly available resources available to you. Beginning with Habitat is a great one to look at wildlife. The National Wetlands Inventory is a federal site that sort of tries to map wetlands. It's not the best. I haven't found it to be incredibly conclusive, but it's a tool nonetheless. But what we really try to do is balance the goals that we have in the state with the ability to site these projects. And it really has to be a balance. Most of the projects that we're working on are not on landfills. Some of them are, and we're making our best effort to do that where possible. But we also have to consider building projects in forest land or on fields like this, as you see on this slide. We also need to be considering the historical impact. Maybe Maine Historical Preservation Committee has a mapped special resource that we're not aware of. Maybe it's a historic site. Maybe something is buried there, like an archaeological finding, or maybe there's some buildings nearby that we don't want to be close to. We also want to be paying attention to conserved areas, hiking trails, snowmobile trails. These are all things that are part of our everyday life, and we don't want to be putting a solar project in the trails that people walk their dog on every day. So it's totally a balance, but Maine is very land rich, and we have a lot of opportunities to kind of look at projects elsewhere. So we push our clients to consider their options, and we say, well, if not here, what about over here? And they really appreciate that. A lot of the developers coming into the state right now are from out of state. They're from away, and they need the guidance to kind of understand, what does the town need? So, as municipal representatives, I would encourage you to, ask these developers just for a sit down, like do a workshop with them, have them explain, what are they trying to do and what are their goals? And maybe you can help them understand what land opportunities are out there in your own town that they're not aware of. Work with them. I think they're here to learn from others. Maine's a good place for those kind of casual conversations. We don't have a lot of like rigid regulations at the town level. And so it allows us to be able to talk about where projects should be within our own towns. Let's go to the next slide. And I think that kind of leads into this idea that we really promote, which is tons of education at the town level. We will oftentimes facilitate those workshops with a planning board, with a select board, with a code enforcement officer, sometimes even with the public. We've organized public open houses for members that not only just abutters, but just people that live in the town to just learn about this. And it's a really important part of this process. We've even got like a kind of a solar 101 document that we've created that creates an outline of the policies that have been discussed here, but also a lot of the kind of how solar is constructed. What does the maintenance look like? I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about solar. Does it even work? Is it even feasible to be built, in Northern Maine? And the answer is yes. These are projects that are being built all across Maine. I kind of like Andrew's background. That's a key. That's good that you put one up in winter. Oftentimes the solar industry is really guilty of putting really nice sunny pictures in the summertime for their marketing materials. And it gives the impression that it doesn't work in the winter. And, we face a harsh reality of winter every year here in Maine. So, making sure that people understand this can work in Presque Isle, this can work in Mars Hill, it can work in Jonesboro, Greenville, wherever, is important. Next slide. So from a design perspective, we really try to keep things simple. So this is a project that was just completed after construction. So it's not fully vegetated yet, but as Nick was indicating, we always plant a meadow buffer under our panels. And part of that, obviously the ground needs to be stabilized and we don't want it to be exposed to bare ground, but part of that is required by the DEP. So I would encourage you as town representatives to reach out to the DEP and ask them for their perspective. They've been permitting a ton of these projects, and they really understand stormwater rules and regulations and promote these projects as very low impact. And I guess as you think of it, you can see here that we've basically got some posts that are driven into the ground for the racking. Those are basically just I-beams. There's a road typically at the beginning, but we don't have a road that goes around the perimeter. So there's very limited impervious surfaces when it comes to a gravel road. And then these fence posts are just driven into the ground as well. There's no concrete in them. So, we really like a simple fence design with wooden posts, an agricultural style fence that meets National Electric Code. Obviously, this whole thing needs to be code compliant. But as you can see, it's really low impact. And so we try to keep things simple in our rollout of these projects. I'm going to put a link in the chat right now for a seed mix, if you're curious about what that might look like, from a local provider called New England Wetland Plants. And they have this seed mix called a conservation seed mix, which has flowering plants along with like fescue grasses that is commonly used on these projects. Sorry, Todd, I sent that privately. All panelists and attendees. Okay, I think I did it right. Anyway, take a look at that. Just, it's a really common practice to keep things simple and make it pollinator friendly. And next slide, which is my last one here. So again, I've been working in Maine on like 70 projects, and they're all unique projects. And my experience has been that every town is different. Every town has a different personality. You've got different people that work there. They have different needs. What's happening in Jonesboro is really different than what's happening in Greenville and Portland. And so NRCM and Maine Audubon have done a good job of providing some really like baseline materials that help to get you started, like an ordinance, like a model ordinance. And I think that's also on the Maine Municipal Association website as well, Todd, right? So, but at the same time, what I've seen is when towns receive those documents, they tend to modify them and tweak them to their own needs. And I would encourage you to do that, and not to feel that it needs to be incredibly prescriptive, but it certainly gets you to square one or maybe square five. But again, it's an ever evolving market here in Maine, and we're all figuring this out. I'll put my contact information in the webinar chat if you have questions about how your town may have unique needs and questions. Happy to talk to people offline about this, so that I guess the reason I avoid unintended consequences is to try not to go too quickly with your rules and regulation. And I'm not advocating for no rules, but every town is unique and different. And so again, use me as a resource if you're looking to get a poll for who's doing solar. I can connect you to other towns that have done it really well, if you're brand new to this. So thanks again for listening to me chat here. Hopefully it was helpful, and I look forward to getting your questions later on.
Great, thanks, Chris. So Jim, I'm going to pull up your slides here, so just bear with me for just a second. But while I'm pulling up Jim's slides, I want to encourage folks who are tuned in to, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. We're going to get to questions after Jim's presentation, which I am pulling up here. Just a second. If I can find it on my screen. And Nick just dropped in the chat the link to the host of municipal solar resources that we mailed out last September to all municipalities. And they're also available on Maine Municipal Association's website, which is the link that we just dropped into the chat here. But I'm going to turn it over to Jim Leighton from the Limestone Water District to talk about the project that they installed. So Jim, take it away.
Thanks, Todd. Good morning. Maybe this is Chuck Kelly's presentation, and sorry he can't be here to go through it. Maybe there's some technical things on here, Andrew, that you may see that you might be able to help a little bit with. I'm not real technical on the solar aspects of it. I just know that it was a good project and it's working. So there may be a lot of slides that we'll skip. So we can move on. So we built this project to hopefully cover 85% of Limestone's needs for the electrical, for water and sewer. We're large, seemed like we're fairly large user for us to cover those costs with almost $100,000 a year in what it would cost us for electrical. Next. Let's see here. We'll move on to the next one. We decided to do the project because we had some land available that is in our wellhead zone, and there's not a lot, if anything, really you can do with land in the water wellhead protection zone. And this being a fixed solar array really worked out well for us to put it in there. So the size of it is right here. We had 1,728 panels, and the system was put up at the end of 2019. You can move to the next. So like I said, it says Industrial Park Road. Basically, we actually, after the solar project, we actually had them change the name of what it was. The system, the place that we got was turned over from the town. Early on in the 80s, they had a land that was donated for an industrial park. It didn't really become too much, so we found water there and lots of it for the town. They determined that that was the best case scenario for this piece of land, so we took it over as wellhead and started getting our water there. So we've actually changed the name of the road to Edgecombe Drive now, which is the people that donated the land to us. Next slide. I think we've got some pictures. We could go through some of the pictures of our, and I think there's a video in here. So this is our arrays that was put up. The system works very well for us. I think we see later on that actually we're producing more than 90% of our power needs at this point. So it's really helping us out a lot for as far as electrical goes. Okay. This was when they were setting up the land to where, each stake would go. Next. And here's just the racking of what each solar panel goes on. And like you had mentioned, it's just, stakes driven into the ground, metal stakes driven into the ground. So very limited digging besides the running wires for each inverter. Next. More of the racking project. I believe those are the boxes, or must be the panels, I would assume, Andrew. Yeah, the panels that were brought on site. Next. Some of the conduit, again, it seemed like it was very limited having to dig, so not much disturbing, and it didn't really have to go very deep. Next. As the just photos of as things go up. One of the concerns that we had once the panels went up, not really thinking ahead of time, was how would we take care of the land? Obviously, like was mentioned before, you can't let the grass grow up, you can't let the trees grow up. So, and there's within a wellhead zone, you have to think differently because you can't use chemicals to treat the grass. So we use our zero mower. We also have a little sidekick mower that goes along. It's kind of a trimmer that hauls behind the mower, and that has done very well for keeping this project cleaned down. Next. Go ahead to the next, just some projects. Maine Public, this is when they were, next photos I think is when they were doing all the setting up and actually hooking up. The day that Maine Public was there. As you can see, this thing was put up in the winter. The solar project was done in the winter, so it was pretty cold, pretty windy. This is just the control panels of it. The inverters, I guess, and where the brains of the whole outfit. Just some more pictures of as the project was going. Like I said, it was done in the winter. Next. And that's a view of when it was complete. Just some drone shots that we had taken. So the dashboard, this shows the power generated. I can't see the bottom of it. It's down a little low, so I don't know what it says underneath the bars where it's which one this is actually for, but it shows the up and down. So the cloudy days, the sunny days throughout the generation period. This one is February to March 2019. Next. Just real quick, like I keep a spreadsheet so we can track the savings of what we're getting compared to what I would pay Maine Public to what I pay my the power provider, and so I can tell at the end of each month how much we actually saved if we were to just pay through Maine Public. Next. 2019 savings. You can see the first quarters through the fourth. So that first year was almost $10,000. Our anticipation when we first sat down and talked about this was our hopes was to save about $5,000 a year. So we did very well with those savings. Next slide. Generation. This one is the year. So you can see the ups and downs through 2019. For the year, for how it produces a little, more obviously in the summer than in the winter, but it still produces very well and keeps us going through the winter months. Next. 2020, the price went down on the savings for the year because the cost of electricity through our Maine Public division actually went down. So but we were still saving more than what we anticipated saving per year. Next slide. This is the 2020. Again, you can see this is a lot better in the January through May months than the last one was in 2019. So the system is working very well. Next. Okay, our savings. So in 2019, 20, and then obviously projecting in 21, when we look at our different rates, we have a C rate the D2 and the EP rate. The EP rate is actually what is at the sewer treatment plant, probably where we use most of our electricity. And there are actually times throughout the year that we're paying more through the PPE than we would be on the EP rate, but it all kind of averages out. And that's just because the rates dropped. That nobody expected rates to drop instead of rates going up. But it's still, it all still equals out in the end. Next slide. So what Chuck's saying is, again, what we talked about, we're close to 95% of whatever is produced on our solar grid in 2020 when we were shooting for 85%. So we don't want to overproduce. And what we're doing is we've adding in some heat pumps in a few places to help use a little more of that electricity. And our goal in the end in 2023 is to actually purchase this solar project and own it so that we can take probably the 6 years to repay ourselves back for the cost of purchasing it. But that was our goal in the beginning, was to find a good project to help us save money and to purchase it as soon as possible. And we're kind of right on track for being able to do that. I think that's the last slide, but I'm not sure. Yep. So Todd, I don't know, or Andrew, if there's anything else you can fill in for that project. That's kind of it. And a quick Chuck could have done a lot better job because he just knows it.
Thanks very much, Jim. Yeah, Andrew, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you, Jim, and thanks for sharing that project with us. It looks I'm so pleased to see that we're still overperforming there. I guess I would just add to that Limestone Water and Sewer District chose to move forward with that project back in 2018, and the level of value of net metering credits was changed in the bill LD 1711 that we discussed earlier, and actually greatly improved. And so the deal is better today than it was when Limestone moved forward with their project. Don't want to make you feel bad about your project, Jim, but
No.
But the financing is, Jim, you probably remember how hard it was to put financing together for that project. We did do it, and it was really, very successful. But the financing is easier to put together, and the savings in some cases can be better than that even than what Jim is presenting. So the financing world has changed a little bit. The value of the net metering credits has improved, and so yeah. Very pleased to see that's working well, and I think we can meet and beat that in the future.
Great. Well, many thanks to all of our presenters. We have about a half an hour for questions and answers. So there's only 2 questions in the Q&A box right now. If folks have questions, please type them into that Q&A box, and we can get through as many of them as we can. This first question is from Dwayne Young from Weston. Question is for Andrew. What are the differences between EMEC and Versant when it comes to building solar projects?
Yeah, good question, Dwayne. Thank you. The answer is LD 1711 put a number of regulations into place that applied only to investor-owned utilities, meaning CMP and Emera, or now Versant. And so when we're working in the electric co-op territories, whether it's EMEC or Holton or some of the others, there's a different set of regulations. There is this enhanced value of net metering credits is not available in those territories. So I think in EMEC, your retail rate for energy supply plus transmission and distribution is all volumetric. I think it's around 8 or 9 cents per kilowatt hour. And so that right there is the whole value of what you can get per kilowatt hour for your solar. Whereas in Versant's Maine public territory, And in Bangor Hydro, it's between, depending on the rate class of the user, 12.5 and 15 cents per kilowatt hour value. So you're sort of taking a pretty serious haircut compared to those utility territories if you're working in a co-op district. And then, of course, the other really important thing about the co-ops is you're capped at 100 kilowatt project. And so, you're not able to benefit from the economy of scale the way that some of these other projects are able to go, up to, 50 and 70 times that size. So 100 kilowatts, just to give you a little perspective, is about, it's about a half an acre of solar. It's about a $250,000 project. And I'll also say it's tough to do these power purchase agreements. It's tough to get outside financing for projects on that scale. So putting together these special municipal and water sewer district financing deals is much iffier in EMEC territory than it would be for a larger project. And we can't do offsite projects for EMEC. There's no ability to put multiple users together on one outside project.
Great, thanks, Andrew. This next question is from Daniel Wagner. Question is, as he understands, there's a limit to the amount of renewable energy that can be passed through the grid. Is there any legislation regarding the electric grid being upgraded to support more renewable energy? And Chris, I'm going to start by answering this question, but I'm going to ask you to kind of tag team in. So, Maine's electricity grid is, certainly could use some updating. As we mentioned earlier, there's limited places where these solar projects can be built. They need to be close to 3-phase power, and there are hundreds of projects in the queue, as it's called. Some are speculative, some are real projects that are interested in connecting to the grid to transmit power from these solar projects. But the queue is very long. Many of the projects will not eventually be built, but many companies, after Maine passed its solar energy laws, got first in line. And because there really is a bottleneck, the wait times in different parts of the state to actually get an interconnection agreement can be quite long, and it can take quite a long time. So Chris, I'm going to let you answer it from more of a technical perspective.
Yeah, it's limited specifically by the substations that are where circuits connect to. Developers are certainly paying fees for the grid to be upgraded, but not at the substation level, typically for the projects that we're talking about here. So they may be extending 3-phase up the street. They may need to be paying for new poles, or they're reconductoring where they're just adding new wires. There might be protective equipment that needs to be installed between the project and the substation. But, in order for more solar to go onto the grid, the substation ultimately needs to be upgraded. CMP is upgrading their substations, but not for the purpose of proliferating solar. They're upgrading their substations just simply because our grid is, as you indicated, Todd, is old and decrepit, and they've got to kind of maintain what's happening out there. But and I mean, to some degree, loads are increasing in certain areas, more urban areas. So it's, and the question is asking also about policy. I'm not aware of any policy that's in place that would encourage or subsidize that at the state level right now. Andrew, do you know of any other policies that are out there to put money in the coffers of these grid upgrades? Yeah.
No, the only thing I would say is that I think would fall squarely into the category of a Green New Deal type thing, right, where there would have to be public funding to sort of come in and say, we want to develop distribution resources in order to accept more distributed renewable energy. It seems unlikely for that to happen, because I think probably the motion we're going to see after the distribution grid gets filled up with generation resources from renewable energy, is more interest in building larger scale, transmission level, multi-hundred acres of solar, like the wind projects that are being sold at really, really cheap wholesale rates for energy. I think that's probably where national and state policy is going to go after we sort of fill up our distribution grids. Best guess.
Agreed. Yeah.
Great. There's only one more question in the Q&A box. Again, if folks have questions, please type that in the Q&A. This question is from Kathy asking if anybody on this call could explain the history or the details of the Caribou Utilities District solar project. Does anybody here know about that project and can speak to it?
Yeah, that was my project. Revision built it, and we started talking to Caribou back in 2018. Like Limestone Water and Sewer District, Caribou kicked off their project with a very streamlined competitive qualifications request. Essentially, at this early stage of development where you don't know if you're going to build on-site or off-site, you don't really know the details of the project. You're trying to create a competitive process where you're finding the best partner to work with to develop project ideas into a completed project. It's best not to request proposals because what you end up getting is a lot of wild guesses as to what projects are going to cost and what their final shape and size is going to be. And so what you end up doing is comparing a bunch of guesses against one another. And if you choose the most optimistic guess, you're going to end up with probably the least qualified solar developer that you're working with, because they're the ones who are going to make the more optimistic guesses. So you choose the higher price and you end up with a more qualified organization that you're working with, but you also have this feeling like, well, we haven't really done our fiscal responsibility because we're not really supposed to choose the highest price. So the best thing to do, it turns out, then, is to request qualifications early on and choose a company based on reputation. Who have they worked with that other organizations, municipalities, water and sewer districts? What projects have they done? How can they point to their qualifications? And how are they going to protect your interests throughout the process? So that was what Limestone did. That's what Caribou did. We partnered with them and essentially went through their entire land portfolio and said, what's the best development opportunity here? Again, we started doing this before LD 1711 passed. So substation capacity wasn't such a high priority item at that time because things weren't being disqualified on that basis because there wasn't a lot of other solar getting in line to be built. So we were really looking at it from a lot of the aspects that Nick has brought to the table in this presentation of, what's going to have the lowest environmental impact, but also what's going to be easy to get to a existing three-phase line. How are we going to build a road to this place in order to get the project, built and then maintained? Where do we have to not cut down trees? Where are we not going to impact existing farmland? And where are we going to put it in a place where the neighbors aren't going to hate looking at it all the time? I mean, speaking personally, I find solar to be very beautiful, and I would love to live next door to a solar array because it's quiet, pollinator habitat and all this stuff, but that's not a universal attitude for sure. I'm a little biased. So we actually ended up narrowing it down to two likely sites. One was co-located with their wastewater treatment facility, and one was here near one of their pump stations for their water district side. It really ended up being that the floodplain was intruding on some of the areas we wanted to build down at the wastewater treatment plant. So we ended up building it up on top of this hill. Let's see. So yeah, we secured financing for them. We gave them an offer that worked for them. And then We ended up getting hit with some higher utility interconnection fees than were anticipated. Fortunately, this new law went into effect at the same time, so we were able to go back and say, listen, the PPA rate that we originally negotiated actually does have to change if we're going to get this project built. This does happen from time to time, but the good news is, thanks to these new laws, your savings are actually going to be better than what we had originally said they were going to be. Prices are going up, values are going up, and so even though you're paying more, you're actually saving more in addition. So their board had to sign off on the project a second time. And then by the end of 2019, we had constructed and activated the system within the time frame that was originally agreed upon. And so far, I believe it's overperforming from our initial estimates in terms of how much energy it was going to generate. We try to be very conservative on our estimates in Northern Maine because of snow loading.
Great.
Does that answer your question, Kathy?
Before we get to this next question, I just want to recognize that a friend of Maine Solar Coalition is here on the webinar here with us today, Chuck Piper from Sundog Solar, who along with Revision and InSource Renewable, another great Maine-based solar company, Chuck and Danny Piper really helped get Maine solar energy policy right, and we're very active in the halls of the State House for many years. So just want to give a shout out to Chuck Piper and Sundog Solar, who also does a lot of municipal solar projects and power purchase agreements. Recently have some projects in Oakland and Thomaston. So just wanted to say hello to Chuck and thank him for tuning in. This next question is from Jim O'Malley about the article recently in the Bangor Daily News about the solar project plan for Presque Isle. I'm wondering if anybody could share any details of that. Chris, are you familiar with that Presque Isle project?
Yeah, looks like it's coming to fruition. I know that National Renewable Solutions, they're based in Minnesota. They're the key developer on this. If you go to the article, they actually have a kind of an interesting 3D model of it. It's right kind of at the northern terminus of the airport and is situated around the old missile silos, being that it's a former Air Force base. I think it's even called like on Missile Street or something like that. That's a great project. I think it's a great use of that land. It reminds me a lot of the Sanford, the project at the Sanford Airport, which is like a 50 megawatt project, I think, that's being either built or finished right now as we speak. And common question that we get on these projects is what's the impact of glare? Are these things going to be like shining in my face? So the fact that the FAA has deemed these not a flight risk to hazards or to pilots is a significant kind of, it sort of speaks to the issue that these really they're non-reflective. They have non-reflective coating on them. I think I saw a report that they only reflect 2% of the sunlight. They're designed to absorb the sunlight. So yeah, airports are kind of a cool place for this. Certainly not a problem. In fact, I think the FAA says that ponds and metal roofs are way more reflective than solar panels. So, and it kind of migratory birds, like it's not an impact to them. They don't want to like land on the solar panels because they see a shiny reflective surface like they would if they saw a pond. So great spot for it. Seems like an interesting development.
Great.
And I think just one last thing. I think the town Presque Isle is purchasing the power from what I'm hearing on this. I don't know if that was established early on, but it looks like they're going to be a direct off-taker. There may be other purchasers of the power if they're not buying all of it. That certainly, like other businesses in town, could be in that sort of subscriber list. So it doesn't have to be a dedicated town project. It could be like a pie chart in terms of who buys the power. But I'm going to assume that they're the bulk of the power purchaser.
Great. Fantastic. Well, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box, so I'm going to let us go 10 minutes early to get to our lunch. I know I'm excited about that. But just a couple of quick things before we wrap up here. Many thanks to Northern Maine Development Commission for hosting us today and for getting the word out about this program. Many thanks to Nick and Andrew and Chris and Jim for your presentations today and for the good work that you do. For the folks on this webinar, again, this was recorded, and you'll get an email from me tomorrow with a link to watch it on YouTube. And please share that with other folks in your municipalities. In that email, I'll also include a link to the municipal solar resources that we helped develop and that Maine Municipal Association has posted to their website. And I'll also include the contact information for all the folks here on this webinar today, if you'd like to reach out for questions about how you can develop solar in your town. So again, thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, everybody.